Hi, me in post again. So, this video was actually originally supposed to be a normal video essay, but I think I bit off more than I can chew of this project. I've recorded the audio all the way back in, I think, July of this year, and I just didn't get around to finishing this video because I didn't want to edit all 18 minutes of this stuff. So I just kept procrastinating until I eventually just forget about it. And now I don't even care anymore. But since I already had the audio recorded, all I needed to do was put this into a video and call it a podcast. I know that's kinda underwhelming, but most of the video is about talking and my experiences with the black bars in Sonic ERaZor 7. So you're not really missing out much anyway. Just imagining the parts should be enough. With all that said, I hope you will enjoy the podcast.
You're probably familiar with the metaphor of the Pandora's box. You do something seemingly simple and it leads to a lot of unforeseen consequences. Now imagine if you had a Pandora's box, inside a Pandora's box, inside a Pandora's box. Hi, my name is Selbi and this is the story of the black bars in Sonic ERaZor 7. I think of this video as therapy. It's a story about naivety, pride, depression, and plot twists. Lots of plot twists. So, let's talk about black bars. Back in 2016, I decided to add a letterbox effect to ERaZor because I thought it would add a neat cinematic touch to cutscenes. While they did the job just fine, it was a very primitive solution. I just used a bunch of basic black sprites to achieve this effect. If that doesn't mean anything to you, think of it like using a Sharpie to draw these black bars on your TV screen. Sure, it works, it does the job, but let's be real here, that's caveman strategy and not a pretty solution at all. Fast forward to the development of ERaZor 7. I knew I wanted a more elegant solution and I found one. Horizontal interrupts. Let me explain a bit about how they work. First of all, an interrupt is basically a signal by the system to stop whatever it's currently doing and go to a completely different place in the code to do something that is more important at this moment. Then it goes back to the place where we left off and continues as if nothing happened. Secondly, in the case of horizontal interrupts specifically, it's an interrupt fired after a scanline has finished drawing on the beam and is currently back on its way from right to left to draw the next line. As you can imagine, this is a very brief window. How brief exactly? Well, the exact number of scanlines varies a lot by game settings and region. So for the sake of simplicity, let's just take the standard vertical screen size of 224 scanlines. I hope I don't need to bring out a calculator to demonstrate that doing something 200 times a second is a lot. But it works, and it does the job just fine. As long as it's all set up properly and the actual horizontal interrupt code itself is not too complex. Foreshadowing. So that's part one of what we need. The exact scanlines where we want to toggle the black bars on or off. But how do we accomplish that? Well, the Mega Drive has two little tricks that do exactly what we need. One instruction to turn off anything but rendering the background color, and another command to set the background color. We don't want blue bars after all. So we got horizontal interrupts and these instructions. All we need for some beautiful letterboxes. Sounds like a job to be done in an afternoon, right? Well, little did I know I had opened the first Pandora's box right there and then. My original idea was straightforward. Enable horizontal interrupts for all scanlines and keep a counter going. Then we can simply check if we're on scanline 40 or something to toggle the display. But you see, 224 horizontal interrupts per second is a lot. Even if you don't have a ton of code on your horizontal interrupt routines, just enabling them will turn the base game into an absolute crawl. The solution, instead, was to rely on yet another feature of the Mega Drive, which allows you to set a counter that waits for the given amount of scanline before it fires the next horizontal interrupt. To put it simply, instead of checking every single scanline to see whether we need to toggle the display, we calculate in advance how many scanlines from now we need to toggle it. It sounded like the saving grace I was looking for. No more lag! But that came with its own set of problems, because this counter has a super annoying little quirk. When you set a new value for it, you expect it to immediately start counting down. But guess what? Setting it actually affects the horizontal interrupt after the next one. That's just how the hardware works. So in other words, before you even get going, you need to set up both the first and second interrupts. Then in the first interrupt, you need to turn off the beam and set up the third interrupt. In the second interrupt, you need to turn on the beam and set up what you do after the third interrupt. And in the third interrupt, you just chill doing the one thing you actually care about, which is turning off the beam. Are you keeping up? Good. To put it in a nutshell, these new black bars sounded straightforward, but it didn't take long before I realized what I had gotten myself into. But again, it was doable. A lot to get your head around, but doable. So I got to work and wrote my new and improved black bars, and they worked! Mostly. See, the beam doesn't care whether it got the instruction to toggle the black bars on or off in time. It'll keep drawing the picture no matter what. That means if we're too slow at setting our horizontal interrupts, the black bars could be toggled on the wrong scanline, or failing that in the middle of a scanline, which is also horrible. Now, the horizontal interrupts themselves are pretty precise, and once they're set, nothing can disrupt them. The real problem, as you then can imagine, is getting them started accurately in the first place. How do we do that? With vertical interrupts. Yeah, so there are actually a ton of different interrupt types, and I'm not gonna go over them all here because that's not the focus of this video. The one thing that you just need to worry about is that vertical interrupts occur exactly once per frame. And that Sonic 1 makes extensive use of these to coordinate a lot of important logic in the game. This includes stuff like updating the sound driver so music keeps playing, as well as drawing the level layout as you move around. If you're not catching on why I'm talking about this yet, that means the vertical interrupt code in Sonic 1 is slow. It's very likely that the routine needs more time than it has before the beam starts drawing the next frame. And there's no such thing as a vertical interrupt within a vertical interrupt. If we're too late setting our initial values for the horizontal interrupts, we're screwed. In the original Sonic 1, that was rarely ever a problem though. The game was mostly optimized and slow-paced enough that it wouldn't ever really be noticeable. Well, there was one tiny exception there to deal with when it came to the water surface in Labyrinth Zone, which is probably the single ugliest hack in Sonic 1, but that's a different story for a different time. Anyway, you can see where I'm going with this. You know how it is with Sonic ERaZor, I love me some good old explosions. And it was especially whenever there was a bunch of explosions on the screen that this quirk would turn into a huge problem. The flickering was absolutely relentless, as you can see in this old footage of this old development build.
Oh god, why did I say that? Now I need to actually show you guys some footage. Well, here goes nothing. Seizure warning, by the way. At worst, it was straight up unplayable. At best, it required a big ass seizure warning. I spent countless hours trying to fix this flickering, but no matter what I tried, there would always be something that would break them. Or, failing that, the black bars themselves would break the entire game. It was a nightmare. At that moment, I thought back of my old Sprite-based black bars. Yeah, they were primitive, but they didn't cut off nearly as many years from my life as these interrupt-based ones. I was this close to just scrapping it all and going back to the old Sprite-based version, just to spare myself from going insane further. But just when I was about to throw in the towel, I hit up my old buddy vladikcomper. I explained the situation and showed him my code.
While the fix would have been possible, he adjusted a more robust approach. Introducing the new and improved Black Bars DX. The main difference was doing everything in our power to make sure that no matter what happens, vertical interrupts happen in time, and that we keep the code inside the horizontal interrupts as short as possible. Instead, we have a bunch of different routines that only do that one exact thing they're meant to do, and nothing else. And to accomplish this logic power, we can change what the horizontal interrupt routine is. Yeah, it turns out you can just do that. It's actually quite simple once you realize you can use RAM instead of ROM for the H-blank handler. The more you know. Anyway, the result of this more optimized approach: near flawless black bars with almost no flickering. It still wasn't perfect, because of how ass the Sonic 1 engine is, but the few flickers remaining were just visible for fractions of a second at the start of the level. Once everything's loaded, the black bars were rock solid like they should be. I would have been perfectly happy calling it a day here. But Vlad didn't stop there. I casually mentioned one day how cool it would be if some parts of the inefficient Sonic 1 engine could be replaced with something more modern. And he just did exactly that. I didn't push him or anything, he just went hog wild by himself. But what a game changer it was. One of the biggest things he overhauled was the logic for graphics decompression and rendering. Levels have never loaded this fast before and been this devoid of slowdowns. Let this be my advice to all Sonic hackers out there: get rid of Nemesis compression in your disassembly as soon as you can. And the black bars? Flawless. Zero flickers. After a whole month of optimizing a small little gimmick, they finally work as intended. So this is where the story would end, right? Everything's in place and nothing can disrupt these bad boys anymore. Well, almost nothing. And this is where the second Pandora's box was opened up. You see, there was one super minor visual glitch remaining despite all of this. And this time it was actually something completely out of our control. It was related to how the hardware just works. Take a look at this footage of me jumping into a giant ring.
And I said it again. Okay, whatever. I will go through my old hard drive and find this footage. Even it's gonna take another hour. Be right back.
Notice how, as the ring crosses the lower part of the screen, the tip of the upper bar would draw one line of the garbage data from the sprite below. I'm gonna be completely honest with you, when I first heard about this bug, I was perfectly happy to gaslight myself into thinking it wasn't an issue. It's already been more than half a year at that point since the idea of redoing the black bars even came to my mind. But vladikcomper, the man, the legend, didn't let that be a roadblock to his path to perfection. And oh boy, if only he knew what a sequel of an adventure he had coming up for himself. The first attempt of a fix was using some very precise timings to quickly enable, disable, and then re-enable the display during the same horizontal interrupt. The idea was to move around the garbage data out of view as much as possible. It looks pretty solid, but no matter how we adjusted the timings, there would always be a little bit of garbage data to the left or right. And if that wasn't bad enough already, it also seemed to be completely emulator dependent. In fact, let me give you a short story, because turns out Blastem, the popular Mega Drive emulator everyone loves, had it so bad that ERaZor 7 made Vlad submit a pull request to Blastem nightly. I can't exactly say I ever expected to be responsible for an emulator bug fix, but here we are. So, if you haven't already, be sure to download the latest version of Blastem if you want those rock solid black bars using hardware mode. Anyway, precise timings were never good enough. So we needed something else. What we finally ended up with is using sprite-based masking at the bottom left of the screen. This is actually a clever little trick that you can already see in the vanilla Sonic 1 game. Have you ever wondered how Sonic's torso is neatly hidden by that emblem on the title screen? Well, it's done by exploiting the way the Mega Drive handles off-screen sprites. By placing a blank sprite to the left of the viewport, everything sprite related to the right of it won't be drawn anymore, giving us full control over the exact line we want Sonic's torso to be cut off. And in case you were curious, this is also why disabling sprite limits in your emulator will cause the lower part of Sonic to be visible again, because there's no more sprite limits, making sure the masking works correctly. So how does this all relate to the black bars? Well, the garbage data came from the VDP mistakenly drawing one line of sprites from the last scan line of the previous frame, because sprite rendering is effectively frozen when disabling display. So by masking the sprites, we can avoid the garbage data entirely. There's just one tiny annoyance about that. The very last line before the bottom black bar would be empty for sprites. It's not really notable for any regular gameplay, but try to enable cinematic mode and then jump into a special stage. You can see how there's one line where the cloudy background bleeds through, because Sonic 1 special stages are entirely made of sprites. But it was the best we could do, and it would eventually turn into emulator mode. But here's the thing, the concept of an emulator versus hardware optimized screen wasn't even on the table back at that point. In fact, at this point we weren't even satisfied with the current solution yet. Not to mention, I was really against adding yet another configuration screen to the game. But, as it soon turned out, that became more of a necessity than anyone could have ever imagined. And the reason? A genius trick using one of the Mega Drive's debug registers. Look, I've already lost track of all the technical details at this point, so I'm not even gonna pretend I know what I'm talking about. But the few things I did understand were still ridiculous enough on its own. This debug register gave us stable black bars like we haven't seen before, because it doesn't actually disable anything, it just cuts the connection to the display. In other words, it doesn't glitch out for us. So that's awesome! There was just one more minor catch, because yeah, there's always a catch. Nearly none of the popular emulators out there support this debug register. That's why you will most likely not see the top bar at all when you select hardware mode, because this register is so damn niche that almost nothing but the original hardware itself can handle it. And you have to imagine what I was in at that very moment. Imagine having the ultimate perfect solution to a problem you've been working on for 6 months handled to you just like that, but you can't use it because of outdated drivers. This is exactly what this situation was like. So we made the tough decision to add yet another screen to choose between the good enough emulator mode and the perfectly buttery, smooth hardware mode that almost nothing can make use of properly, except real hardware itself. Hooray. But anyway, phew, finally done. We didn't get a one-size-fits-all solution, but at least we got the perfect solution in the most ideal situation, but still have a way to support all the emulators out there. Or that's what I thought, because of course it isn't over. It's never over with the black bars. Haven't you caught on yet? Each Pandora's box will eventually lead to the next Pandora's box. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So of course, at the last moment, mere days before the Sonic hacking contest deadline, the black bars had one last little trick up its sleeve to make everyone miserable. Remember when I said most emulators don't support the debug register? What could be worse than not supporting something? Well, it's supporting something in big old quotation marks. If you play Sonic ERaZor 7 in Kega Fusion, you might have noticed that unlike any other emulator, you aren't greeted with the black bars configuration screen when you first boot up the game. You go straight to the Sega screen. This isn't a bug. This was a very, very, very deliberate skip. Kega Fusion, for whatever reason, thinks the debug register is a PSG register. Or in layman's terms, it thinks it's supposed to produce sound.
Man, I could do this all day, but unfortunately this is gonna be the last time you will hear me. Serious headphone warning coming up.
Yeah. In an attempt to not jump scare you Kega users out there, we decided to skip the screen on your behalf. We tested it on many other emulators, and thankfully only Kega seems to have this musical jump scare. And it was at this moment that the beast was finally tamed. The beast that was the black bars. Every minor increment, every setback, every new curveball. These letterboxes had a lot in store for us, but at the end of the day, through the sheer willpower of wanting to get this goddamn feature as robust and seamless as possible, it did eventually come true. And with that, we end today's story time. I don't think it's too difficult to understand why I would like you to take a moment to appreciate these black bars in the game when you see them. Yes, they might just be one of the most insignificant things about the game. But the horrors and absolute roller coaster of emotions these two black rectangles had in store was nothing short of insane. Once again, a huge thank you to vladikcomper for his help in making this stupid little effect work as cool as it does. Thank you for watching, I'll see you around, bye bye!